Good to have you with us on this Wednesday edition of Ed Schultz News and Commentary. The French president making the rounds, getting support as he met with the president yesterday. He'll meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin today. And this is going to be an interesting effort, so to speak. The sanctions on Russia with Crimea and the Ukraine are going to be up at the end of next month. Can this coalition fighting against ISIS hold together and also these sanctions be in place, staying in place? This is a tightrope walk, I think, for the French president. Yesterday, President Obama lending his support and the United States' effort to fighting ISIS with the French.
We've got a coalition of 65 countries who've been active in pushing back against ISIL for quite some time. Russia right now is a coalition of two. Iran and Russia supporting Assad. But I think it's important to remember that you've got a global coalition organized. Russia's the outlier. We hope that they refocus their attention on what is the most substantial threat, and that they serve as a constructive partner.
And what will be Russia's retaliation now that the Turks have shot down a Russian fighter? One of the pilots has been recovered. But the big question is, can we defeat ISIS and can we remain safe as a globe and do it this way without ground troops? The Republicans, of course, are hecklers from the stands. They, of course, say the president isn't doing the right thing. We're not doing enough. There's not enough drones, not enough airstrikes. And, of course, we can't get this done without boots on the ground. I don't have those answers. Most Americans don't. Who's been correct on the Middle East from this country for decades? Not many. Colonel Jack Jacobs, retired MSNBC military analyst, joins us. Colonel, good to have you with us.
Hey, hi, Ed.
What can be done more than what we're doing right now without boots on the ground? And your thoughts on this 65-country coalition the president's talking about?
Well, the short answer is nothing more. Any military person will tell you that if you want to defeat somebody on the ground, particularly an outfit like ISIS that is focused on terrain, their whole ideology requires them to control terrain. Airstrikes are not going to do it. You have to have people on the ground to seize and hold terrain once the airstrikes and artillery and all that stuff have done their job. But we're not going to do that. We don't have any political will to do that. We wasted a decade or more in the Middle East not getting done any of the things that we said we were going to do, and actually increasing the turmoil in the region. What's really required here is a multinational force that's composed not of Americans or even NATO, but of the countries in the region that actually have a vested interest in seeing the place calm down. That includes Egypt, for example, who has a great air force. Mm-hmm. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, huge air force with American equipment, American ordnance. Iran even, but they don't seem to have much interest in getting involved, and they're sitting on the sidelines, and they're not going to contribute. But the short answer is, bombs alone are not going to do anything to anybody, and we're not going to send 100,000 or 200,000 troops there for a decade or more in order to secure the area. So it's going to require a great deal of diplomacy to forge a real coalition of people who are actually going to do something, not just countries, the 65, who are kind of interested in seeing what happens there.
Colonel, your thoughts on the aftermath of the Russian pilot being shot down by the Turks?
Well, the Russians have violated Turkish airspace many times before, been yelled at before, and they continue to do it. What the Russians are doing, and what the Russians were doing when their Su-24 was shot down, were bombing Turkmen, Turkish ethnic people who are living in Syria and who are more or less protected by the Turks. And they've been doing it for some time, violating the airspace for some time, and I think the Turks just decided that they'd had enough. The Su-24 was actually in Turkish airspace for about 4 seconds, but that was enough to take it down. That causes a great deal of difficulty there, particularly between Russia on the one hand and Turkey on the other, who ostensibly, except for the fact that they're one supporting Assad and the other one is not, who are actually inextricably intertwined in a great number of ways, including economics. So this is a big problem now, much more for Putin than it is for Turkey, because Putin's kind of painted himself into a corner with a wide variety of adventures that are not panning out very well, Ed.
How do you think the president's playing Vladimir Putin right now? I mean, he's, isolating Russia in a sense, saying that they're with Iran and we've got 65 coalition countries who are fighting ISIS, although Russia is hitting ISIL targets in Syria. So this is a very strange dynamic that's unfolding here. And the backdrop of this is what's going to happen to the sanctions that are going to expire next month due to the actions of the Russians in Crimea. Will that coalition hold together? I mean, the French play a key role here, don't they?
They do indeed. This is an interesting boxing match. There's a lot of rope-a-dope on both sides here. We want to make sure that the sanctions stay in place. I think we're going to use the sanctions. The West is going to use the sanctions as bait, as trade bait, to get Russia to participate in knocking out ISIS. But Russia doesn't care about ISIS. They care about ISIS only as an enemy. Their sole objective here is not even to keep Assad in power, but to keep Assad in power long enough for both them, the Russians, and Iran to have a seat at the table when all the fighting starts. They already know that Assad's going. It's just a question of who's going to be in control of Syria once Assad goes, and Russia wants it to be Russia. So we're on the wrong side. If what we want to do is team up with Russia to knock off ISIS, that's not going to work, because our objective to get rid of Assad is totally and completely different than Russia's objective, which is to keep Assad in place long enough for Russia to influence the outcome. I have to say that we painted ourselves into a corner too. We're kind of inept. We've turned out to be the world's scold. We tell people how to live their lives. And it's not just this administration. Previous administrations have done the same thing. I remember when Bush said, everybody loves democracy. That's where we're going into Iraq. Well, everybody obviously doesn't love democracy. And even those who do are not necessarily willing to fight for it. Trying to convert the rest of the world into images of Republican democracy as practiced in the United States clearly doesn't work. And now, by saying that we're not going to do, we're implacably wedded to the notion of Assad's going, and we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that he goes, puts us at odds with potential allies here in getting rid of ISIS, who is, by most measures, a far more potent threat than Assad in Syria is, Ed.
Certainly seems like it. There's no question about it. Colonel Jack Jacobs, always great to visit. Thanks for your insight. I appreciate it. Thank you.
A delight, Ed. Thank you.